On the 3rd of February, 517 AL, a gathering of scientists, technologists, and officials from across the Confederacy amassed on a world the Skrek had named the Archives. They had assembled to witness a strange monolith, whose origins and purpose had been lost even to the remaining Skrek themselves. A strange pattern of eldritch lights shimmered across its surface. They were bizarre and almost unpredictable, but unmistakably a kind of countdown. At the exact moment the pattern reached its natural conclusion, and the countdown came to an end, a previously unnoticed rise in subspace energy across the galaxy suddenly exploded in severity. Communications were ruptured, hyperspace travel became unreliable, and subspace storms bathed entire star systems in vibrant, but ultimately harmless radiation. Within weeks, however, the worst effects of the subspace discharge had faded. Communications were restored, the hyperlanes were busy once again, and interstellar civilization resumed, seemingly without any lingering ill effect. That the galaxy was in the opening phase of a potentially apocalyptic crisis would not be realized for months. It was only when attempts were made to recontact the Imdar system that the first worrying signs emerged. A sparsely populated backwater on the periphery of the Madarician People's Federation, that Imdar had not yet been reconnected with any interstellar communications network, even months after the discharge, was hardly seen as unusual. Home to only freelancers, smugglers, and piracy elements, communications with star systems in that region were routinely cut off, with attempts to restore them hindered by lengthy travel times. When neighboring star systems similarly went dark, however, the People's Federation began to investigate the cause in earnest. While astrologically close to Antares, unfavorable hyperlane routes meant that Imdar was of no practical concern to the Confederacy, a distant system for all intents and purposes. The efforts of the nation were instead still dedicated towards stabilizing its allies and neighbors in the decades following the capitulation of the Skrek Empire. Reports of decimated Madarician fleets and armies were initially assumed to be the work of the Tees-Roo, an ancient nation nearly the equal of the Skrek in their day. Amidst the ongoing war between the Tees-Roo and the Madarician alliance, the true nature of the threat in the Imdar system was confused and misidentified. The loss of an Antares Treaty Organization battleship in the region only added to the confusion, further escalating tensions. But as reports grew clearer, came the realization that neither the Tees-Roo or the Madaricians were responsible for the growing chain of dead systems. In ancient myth, the land of Megiddo was prophesied to be the site of an apocalyptic battle. Within the Confederacy, however, it was instead merely the name given to the first extragalactic star system settled by Antares. Located in a small cluster of dead worlds, just past the outer periphery of the galaxy's spiral arms, it had become a center of commerce due to its unique gateway nexus, perhaps the work of the Skrek Empire or some other long-fallen civilization. The creatures that emerged from that nexus were unlike anything foretold in Earth's Book of Revelation, but the battle was similarly apocalyptic. Neither ships nor living creatures, vast assemblages of light and subspace itself poured into the system. Nearly the entirety of the Confederacy's 6th Fleet, dedicated to the defense of Megiddo, was lost in an instant, and the trade stations and mining outposts similarly eradicated. Faced with the irrefutable evidence that some otherworldly force had entered the galaxy, the Confederacy ordered the mobilization of its forces and the activation of wartime conditions across the Antares Treaty Organization. This order was matched by dozens of other powers across the galaxy, but with Megiddo cut off and the extragalactic nexus now harnessed by interdimensional invaders, they could now strike without warning within any one of several dozen star systems. Even the Pilgrim Fleet, the most advanced formation within the ATO, was unable to evade ambush by the invaders, its last ship narrowly escaping destruction. Everywhere across the galaxy came reports of extra-dimensional incursions and star systems stripped of all life. With emerging footholds in multiple territories, including those of the Confederacy's allies, the initial strategy to counter the invaders was confused and ineffectual. Within the Confederacy, every effort was made to fortify the most vulnerable star systems, those directly connected to the Gateway network. One such site was the Zurican Black Hole, It had become famous within the Confederacy, first for its extensive research facilities centered around the anomaly's event horizon, and later for the construction of the Coxura matter decompressor. A station of tremendous scope, the decompressor was considered the ultimate refinement of gravitic redirection. By boring into the black hole itself, an almost unlimited supply of matter could be extracted and refined. It was one of the Confederacy's greatest technological achievements and a pivotal foundation of the nation's economy. In analyzing the movements and apparent strategy of what history would name the unbidden, Confederate scientists would later speculate that this manipulation of gravity might have acted as a kind of beacon to the extra-dimensional invaders. Whatever the cause might have been, as soon as the unbidden became aware of the decompressor's existence, their fleets converged upon it. With the Confederacy forced to defend multiple points across its territory, the Zurichian black hole was defended only by the remnants of the 6th Fleet, hastily reinforced, but hardly at its full strength. Under-equipped, undermanned, and prematurely returned to active service, the 6th Fleet ships and sailors had barely trained together for more than a few months when the first unbidden formation arrived. Yet, as the only major fleet in the Confederacy to have engaged the invaders directly, its surviving officers proved instrumental in confounding the unbidden's powerful, yet imprecise attacks. The opening stages of the Battle of Zurich was unlike any other fought in the Confederacy's history, resembling more a series of interconnected feigned retreats and routes. The strategy failed to inflict any meaningful damage upon the invading forces, yet by avoiding a pitched battle, the 6th was able to prolong the engagement long enough for the 1st and 7th Confederate fleets to arrive. Even with an overwhelming numerical superiority, Antares' forces endured significant losses before the unbidden fleet withered away into nothingness. The victory was the first of its kind in the galaxy, emboldening allies and other foreign powers with the knowledge that victory over the unbidden in mass fleet actions was possible. Yet, within just a few months, a second force of the interdimensional invaders emerged out of the rift. The 1st, 6th, and the 7th fleets, depleted significantly by the previous engagement, were forced to retreat. With the loss of the Coxura matter decompressor, the economy of the Antares Confederacy collapsed almost instantly. Without the raw matter necessary to maintain the enormous production lines keeping the Confederate Navy reinforced, both the armed forces and nation seemed poised to disintegrate. The actions of the Confederacy, however, had not gone unnoticed, and within the galactic community, it was Antares that emerged at the forefront of the defense effort. In exchange for various elements the Confederacy possessed in abundance, the Matarician People's Federation and Rothugan Empire entered into an unprecedented trade agreement, dedicating an enormous percentage of their industrial output to the Confederate military-industrial complex. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th battles of Zurich were merely the start of what would become a seemingly endless campaign to hold the system. The fleet actions fought here grew in size and scope until in the eyes of the galaxy, they had become the supreme drama upon which the entire war seemed to hinge. For 7 years, extra-dimensional forces poured out of the gateway, assailing themselves against the massed Confederate defenses. Multiple times the system was lost, the matter decompressor disabled, and Confederate fleets scattered across the surrounding systems. But each time, either through the mass production of the galactic community, the tenacity of the forces ordered to counterattack, or sheer resolve, the system was retaken and the decompressor hurriedly reactivated. It had long been remarked that Antares was the nation of 1,000 nations. Its citizens had come from every manner of world across the galaxy, and that heritage could be seen and felt everywhere within the Confederacy. Yet its critics had been vocal in claiming that while Antares was undeniably 1,000 nations, it was rare that it was one. In every conflict, every contest, from the liberation of the Vrul to the invasion of the Great Khan, even during the campaigns against the Skrek and the Greater Terran Empire, the nation had truly united, only fleetingly. In the war against the unbidden, the national spirit of Antares was catalyzed into something grander, something deeper. It was the refinement of a simple idea that had been expressed in many different forms throughout its history, as the raging of a martial fire, the concept of Antares exceptionalism, the imagery of a new colossus, or the simple notion that evil must be opposed. It asserted itself on every world in the Confederacy, emboldening each citizen towards the same great effort. For perhaps the first time in history, the citizens of Antares embodied the concerted determination of the Earhart pioneers, every doubt lost in the struggle against extinction. Even in the former worlds of the Skrek, the ideals of the Confederacy took hold with an iron grip. The font of knowledge, once the decrepit throne of a fallen power, was restored, its long crippled foundries now burning with such light as to be visible from orbit. Millennia ago, the Skrek had fought to save all civilization, and now they did so again. The pride and honor of their ancient empire finally revived. Within its endless industries, the stain of slavery was burned away, and the font of knowledge transformed into a great arsenal of democracy. With the attention of the unbidden directed on Zucanus, came the opportunity for counterstrokes. In 530 AL, a great victory was achieved by the T-Zru, and the path to the heart of the interdimensional rift was opened. Presented with the moment to end the advance of the unbidden in a single stroke, Confederate fleets abandoned the defense of Zucanus, instead driving towards Imdar itself. It was only when battle had been joined with the extra-dimensional forces surrounding the Great Wound in reality was it realized that to close this tear, the strange ethereal constructs of the unbidden erected across the galaxy would all have to be destroyed. With Confederate fleets engaged, and without any means to retreat, all that could be done was to hope that the other nations of the galaxy would follow their lead. For weeks, the massed forces of the Confederacy fought their way to the tear, until their fire could be directed upon the rift itself. To the tremendous relief of all Antares, their faith in the galaxy was rewarded. Elsewhere, a final offensive by the galactic community had destroyed the last of the Unbidden's constructs. The rift was finally closed. The nation that had entered the war against the Unbidden was not the same one that ended it. In countless ways, the Confederacy had been transformed. Within the Antares system, terraforming technologies had reformed the worlds of El-Haji and Vin into paradises. In the Dronofeg system, an artificial ring world had been constructed rivaling any of the greatest wonders in the galaxy. But the greatest change was in the soul of Antares itself. The Confederate republics of Antares had always been a compromise, a labyrinth of agreements and stipulations meant to balance the power of the republics with that of the federal system. It was a compromise that was no longer needed. On May 22nd, 532 AL, representatives of each Republic of Antares made their way one by one to the floor of Parliament in Sigalo and announced the results of the last national referendum held by the Antares Confederacy. That evening, at midnight Sigalo time, the Confederate Republics of Antares were dissolved, and the Antares Commonwealth established. The formation of the Antares Commonwealth was the greatest and most far-reaching reform ever enacted across the nation. It transformed the sovereign republics into constituent states, solidified the roles of each branch of government, and ended the contradictions and peculiarities that had defined Antares politics. But amidst this new wave of optimism and renewal was the expectation that the greatest failure of the Confederacy would be remedied. The declaration of war against the Greater Terran Empire occurred simultaneously with a sweeping decisive strike through the Suhari Aldebaran wormhole. It was almost identical to the Reyes operation attempted 40 years earlier, but the scale of the forces involved defied any comparison. Forged by the trials of the unbidden war, fueled by the master industries of their shining worlds, Commonwealth forces had grown exponentially larger. During fleet actions in Aldebaran, Capella, Sigma Draconis, Sirius, and dozens of other star systems, the military forces of the Terran Empire were systematically torn apart. In their wake came vast armadas of troop transports, and the Commonwealth Army embarked on the liberation campaigns for which they had always been intended. In the war against the Greater Terran Empire, every soldier, on both sides, became a casualty. Some escaped physical wounds, but none were above the emotional torment of the conflict. The Terran state was no longer a nation in any meaningful sense, but an inhuman mechanism running with deadly precision towards its own destruction. Unable to achieve victory, it instead dedicated itself towards merely increasing the suffering and violence, punishing Antares for every step forward it took. Through their superstitious belief in technology, the leaders of the Terran Empire had abandoned any feeling for the life and dignity of man. The individual held no importance, no consideration given to their uniqueness or distinctiveness, used up instead as a raw material. Men, women, and children were thrown in the face of Commonwealth guns, expended as any soldier might expend ammunition. The Battle of Earth was decided before it began, but the inhuman insanity of the Terran Empire prevented any surrender or withdrawal. Whatever glory that might have been won was replaced by a tremendous feeling of agony that gripped every Commonwealth soldier with cruel force. The birthplace of mankind had been defiled, transformed into an unsurpassed violation and degeneration of the human essence. Earth was a graveyard, a place where untold millions of lives had been senselessly snuffed out, where an immeasurable wealth of human happiness, human plans, hopes, talents, and fertile possibilities of the future were destroyed forever. This, and nothing more, was the prize that the Antares Commonwealth had won.
In Stellaris Invicta, the Templin Institute guided the Antares Confederacy into an uncertain future. The live streams are now over, but remain available over on the Templin archives. On the Templin Commissary, however, a new piece of artwork depicting the liberation of Earth is now available for purchase. You'll find the links in the description.